You mentioned Carson Beck there, and that's a perfect segue into the next part of our conversation here. I want to talk about some of the top quarterbacks in college football. We've talked about Jalen Milroe a little bit, as well as Shedeur Sanders, but there's some other really good ones out there. Carson Beck, Jackson Dart from Ole Miss, Quinn Ewers. There's a lot of good ones. Dylan Gabriel transferred this year into Oregon. This class may not be as sexy as last year's class. We see some of the success that they're having right now in the preseason in the NFL, some of those guys. But what are just some of your overall thoughts on this year's crops of quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think that Shedeur Sanders is going to be kind of one of those that could be top 3 or could fall down to around like top 10, top 15, kind of like he did last season. Only time will tell, and hopefully he has a fair shot at it with the people around him that he needs. I think that Carson Beck is far and away the best quarterback in this class. I think that there's a pretty decent gap between 1 and 2 in this one. I'm not sure a lot of people necessarily share that opinion, but to me, he has everything you could possibly want from a mental processing and an accuracy perspective. He did the classic thing that I like to see that is very respectable, especially in this era. He sat and held the clipboard for a long time behind some really talented quarterbacks named JT Daniels and Stetson Bennett. And those two players, I mean, had very different paths, but brought really good things to the table in their own way. And I think that he picked up a lot from them. One thing that he has that JT Daniels did not have, and that Stetson Bennett had in a way, but I think that Carson Beck does it better, is improvisation ability. I think that the modern era of quarterbacking comes down more than anything else to, are you good and solid from the pocket first and foremost, but do you have improvisation ability? And that's not the same thing as mobility to go get the job done on third down when you need to pick up a few yards by yourself. And so I think just between that and his leadership ability, I know that Kirby Smart has mentioned that he wants to see him show a little bit more fire on the field. But other than that, it's kind of hard to knock him for much of anything. And then Quinn Ewers at Texas last year did a lot of really good things. I don't think that Texas returns quite as much as it had last season. And I think that, quite frankly, they entered the season overrated, to be honest with you. But looking at Quinn Ewers and just specifically by himself, one of the things that troubles me is just some of the errors that he had in that college football playoff game against Washington. It led a pretty nice comeback effort, one of the best games I've ever attended and covered. But there were just some things I would have liked to have seen him do better there. And whenever I think about watching that game in person and think about watching Carson Beck last season and the way that he really took the bull by the horns, I don't see those two guys on quite the same playing field. And we move into some of the more underrated quarterbacks. I think this is going to be a really big year for the dark horse quarterback because, like you said, this quarterback class is not nearly as stacked as the one before it. And you have some guys that people are not talking about quite as much. Garrett Greene at West Virginia could do some really big things. He's still kind of easing into his own as the head guy there at quarterback, but I think he builds upon that in a very big way this season. Jalon Daniels at Kansas, you hear his name come up a few times, but then it seems to kind of simmer down. And that's because he's constantly caught by the injury bug, it seems like. But if he can stay healthy, a lot of good things that he can do. You mentioned Jackson Dart, Caden Salter at Liberty, another one to watch. So it's going to be really interesting to see who those diamonds in the rough are this season.